Just before completing its first year in power, the Labour government published a swathe of new strategies, including its overarching industrial strategy and, more pertinently for us at the Chartered Institute, its trade strategy. To discuss this and more, I am delighted to be joined by two fantastic guests. We have Sean Ramsden, MBE, the CEO and founder of Ramsden International, one of the UK's largest food and drink wholesale exporters, and also Grace Thompson, as ever, our UK Public Affairs lead. Now, Grace, if I may begin with yourself, in your analysis of the trade strategy, you said it provided a long-term vision with lots of positive impacts for exporters and importers. Could you say a bit more about what measures in the strategy are going to have such a positive impact for UK businesses?
Yeah, thanks so much, Will. And I think before I come on to those specific measures, I will just re-emphasise that point about long-term vision, because that is something that the trading community has been calling for a long time, having more of a long-term plan. I mean, this is 10 years, but it's still quite a long-term vision. And having as well that comprehensive import and export strategy, which is something else that we've been calling for. So very pleasing to see within the trade strategy, actually, even though just a small segment, an intentional section around the government's proactive approach to imports and how it wants to support on supply chains so that UK customers can keep having access to the high quality goods that we need to import as well as exporting. It was really positive to see the expansion of some of UKEF's capacity. I think for a long time, actually, access to finance has been a real barrier, particularly for many small businesses. That's certainly the feedback we hear quite a lot from our community. The digitalisation elements as well, building these new digital trade corridors, actually developing on the work that's already been done in terms of things like the border trade demonstrators, where we're trying to make trade more seamless in terms of less checks, greater transparency throughout the supply chain, so that data can be checked along the way and reduce costs, both to the companies who are doing the exporting, but also eventually to the consumer. So there's a lot there, some more kind of root and branch things as well around investing in CDS and looking at customs accreditation and what that looks like to have like a specific accreditation for brokers. So loads of really positive things in there. And I think the main thing I would emphasise is this is the beginning of many conversations. A lot of things still have a lot of flesh to put on the bone, but we're seeing a vision here, and that's a long-term vision for the UK trading community.
Very exciting. And Sean, thank you for joining us today. It's great to have one of the UK's preeminent exporters and also a member of ours as well. Could you say a bit more about what measures excite you in the strategy for companies like yours, but also for companies who are maybe newer or less established in export?
Thank you, and thanks for having me on. I think firstly, I would say is that the fact that there is a strategy is a huge first step. It's great to see that government is actually planning ahead beyond a horizon of 1 or 2 years. I think that some of the things that stand out for me are the focus on non-tariff barriers, because as many exporters will know, it's not so much the tariffs as the complexity and the non-tariff barriers that are the barrier to be able to export effectively. I am quite heartened to see the digital piece in there, because I think there's an opportunity to really create a lot of value by stripping out a lot of the cost and complexity of the administration of exports, so the digital piece is very good. And of course, trade agreements. CPTPP is a very exciting thing, and it's great to see the US deal, the India deal, and several more in a pipeline. I'm a great believer that free trade benefits everybody involved. It benefits the exporting country, the importing countries and consumers up and down the supply chain. So the more trade agreements we can get, the better.
And Sean, actually on that point, I think another really positive thing in terms of the agreements was this piece around having more flexible agreements. So not always having to do a full FTA, but going for, digital trade agreements, specifically where needed, or even like we've seen with the US having an economic prosperity deal. Would you also welcome that flexibility?
Absolutely. I think, and I'm no expert, of course, but I think perhaps there's too much emphasis on these huge, great overarching agreements between countries, where actually sometimes the best approach might well be an industry-specific agreement that unblocks a particular channel or in a particular industry. As an example, I think the Swiss agreement, the Swiss relationship with the EU is comprised of 800 separate industry-specific agreements that have been established over a course of many, many years.
We'll come back to trade agreements in a moment, but just Sean, you mentioned non-tariff barriers as well. Our food and drink lead, Joe Goldsworthy, paid particular attention in his analysis of the strategy to the ongoing alignment with the EU on sanitary standards, something which was secured at the summit recently. How important, I mean, we know the UK is not going to be in the EU customs union or single market anytime soon, but how central is that relationship with Europe in terms of making this trade strategy a success?
So traditionally, the EU collectively has been an enormous market for British food exports. And of course, that sort of rather dropped off a cliff after Brexit, because Brexit brought with us incredible complexity and cost to exporting food and drink, particularly anything with a meat or dairy content. So anything that unblocks that is good. It's great to see that there'll be alignment on standards. My only nervousness is that they haven't started addressing the details of that yet. My watch out would be to the negotiators that not to jeopardize our ability to sell food or to trade beyond the EU, because whilst the EU is an incredibly important market, most analysts will tell you that the long-term growth opportunities perhaps reside outside of the EU. But having said that, the EU, obviously, and anything we can do to create frictionless trade with the EU is a good thing.
Just going beyond the EU then, so you've mentioned the India and the US trade deals, but also the trade strategy lists a number of other countries the UK is looking to closen trade ties with, whether through trade deals or other types of agreements. So South Korea, Switzerland, and the Gulf region are all mentioned. So too is China as well, interestingly. How important a role can government play in terms of opening up these other markets to the UK business community?
Oh, I think all of the markets you mentioned have got good opportunities for certainly for British food and drink. Again, my focus would be, I would stress the negotiators to be looking at the non-tariff element of that rather than just the tariffs alone, because my experience in trying to sell British food around the world over 30 years has been, it's not so much whether it's 5 or 8 or 10% tariff. It's the non-tariff barriers. It's the complexity. The EU is a great example of that. It's not so much import duties as such as what you have to do to move to export and to import food and drink products, and they're often more difficult things to address. I suspect. But having said that, of course, the more free trade we have, the better.
I would just add to that as well, actually. I completely agree on your points about opportunities beyond the EU, because I think one thing particularly interesting, the day that the trade strategy came out, the Global Trade Outlook document also came out, which is a hefty document, but would definitely encourage people to be reading that. And it looks at a longer term projection of where the opportunities are going to be globally in trade up until about 2050, I think. And definitely the Asia Pacific area, Africa, huge opportunities there, particularly, I suppose, in services. So we're looking a bit beyond food and drink here as well. But looking longer term, as businesses are planning, they need to be seeing where these trends are changing and where there's new regions to be investing in.
Thank you, Grace. I mean, as well as the trade strategy and the industrial strategy, which you mentioned at the top, both those strategies were released not long after the infrastructure strategy and the strategic defence review. There's also been, I think today that we're recording, the financial services reviews come through as well. So to what extent are all of these strategies and reviews linking up with each other, and why does that matter?
It's a really interesting point, especially the question as to does it matter, and I'll come to that at the end. But yes, we've got the Leeds reforms today with financial services, as you mentioned, trying to attract more investment into the UK. And I suppose for trade policy wonks like myself who are looking at this from like a high level, it was quite pleasing to see the way that the strategy sort of came out. So you had the SDR, Strategic Defence Review, which looks at the immediate priorities of protecting security for our citizens, which is the highest priority of a government, of course. Then the infrastructure strategy, which is very much about the wheels on which the country runs, literally, and kind of then leading into how that supports the industrial strategy and those 8 growth driving sectors. So they flowed into each other well, and then the trade strategy looking at how do you internationalise those 8 growth driving sectors and beyond. But I think personally, from speaking to many businesses, many of our members over the past few weeks, I'm not sure they care that much about what's in, an 80-page strategy, at least not, reading through the whole thing. They just want to know which bit of that strategy applies to them. They're probably not thinking of how one links to another or not. It helps us because it helps us give a narrative framing, I suppose, as we're looking at the big picture. But really what we need to be doing at the Chartered Institute and other organisations beyond is translating those strategies into actionable points for business. And I know there's a lot of organisations which are working on that now, looking at things like how do you get an injection of funding from the British Business Bank regionally to your member and help them link up those opportunities and understand what they are. So I would say very important to have the strategies, great long-term vision, but the focus now should be on how do you apply those to businesses down the street.
Grace, I'm shocked by the notion that our viewers haven't all read every single page of the trade and industrial strategy, but we'll move on from that. Just finally, our Director General Marco Forgione said he was proud of the role that the Chartered Institute played in informing and shaping these strategies. Grace, let's begin with yourself. Could you just say a little bit about what role the Chartered Institute has had in that?
Well, yeah, we're really intentional in feeding back that business voice to government, and so we do a lot of surveying and direct reach outs to businesses to get their views so that we can feed them in appropriately to government. So we put in a formal submission on the trade strategy in response to their call for evidence. We participated in a number of roundtables, feeding back our views from different ones of our experts, met directly with officials who are writing the strategy, and also wrote specifically to ministers on areas which perhaps were not expansively covered in the trade strategy. So things like support for women in trade, which has huge economic potential, but wasn't significantly covered in the trade strategy. So we feed in via those mediums, and also we're very keen that we don't just kind of leave it there. We want to be feeding back to the business community, okay, as I said before, this is what it means for you now that the strategy has been published, and also working with the officials where there are announcements that could be developed further and where there's not been an expansive layout of what the next steps are, to understand how we can be supporting with that as we go along. So yeah, it's very much a hand-in-glove piece of work really between the government and industry, and I think that's been a really positive part of this process actually, is that as they've been shaping these strategies, government has really proactively reached out and wanted to hear from not only businesses directly, but also associations such as ours, where we're gathering the views of members.
And Sean, obviously, from a business and a member of ours indeed, I mean, how important is it for you to see that Chartered Institute is playing that role?
Oh, it's hugely important. I mean, we're members of the Institute primarily to give a voice to the industry. We would, nobody expects, government ministers to talk to individual businesses like ours. So having the Chartered Institute as that voice across exporting businesses and potentially exporting businesses is hugely important.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Sean. Thank you, Grace. A very comprehensive digest of the trade strategy in particular and some of the other strategies it all links to. And if you do want to find out more about how the Institute advocates for its members and the wider business community, do visit the advocacy page on the website, expo.org.uk. It's under the About tab.